When Hurricane Helene slammed into the Georgia coast on September 28, 2024, forecasters called it unstoppable. Winds over 100 miles an hour, a storm surge high enough to erase whole neighborhoods. Thousands fled inland that night. But in one small cedar-shingled house near the dunes, a mother stayed behind because her disabled daughter couldn't be moved. As the storm roared toward them, something appeared in their window. Before dawn, the hurricane that should have destroyed their street suddenly turned aside. Some called it coincidence. Others still believe it was the night the Virgin Mary stood between the wind and a child. Before we start with the full story, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The wind had been rising all day, rolling in from the Atlantic like a slow-moving train. By evening, the radio stations were nothing but warnings, and the television map glowed red where the coast curved inward toward Georgia. People said Hurricane Helene was the worst they had seen in 40 years. To most, that meant time to run. To Emma Rosales, it meant time to prepare the house and pray. She lived 3 streets back from the dunes, in a cedar-shingled home that had already outlasted 2 hurricanes, her husband's illness, and more quiet heartache than she ever spoke of. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and salt. Her daughter Sofia, 27, lay in the hospital bed, set up in the living room, after the crash 2 summers before. Machines clicked and hummed around her like slow breathing. Emma kept the blinds half drawn so Sofia could still see the outline of daylight on the wall. When the evacuation order came through the emergency alert system, Emma did what she could. She called the county helpline, the parish volunteer list, even the charity van that usually carried the elderly to clinics. Every answer was the same. Too many calls, not enough drivers. The bridges already closing. She looked at the wooden ramp outside, built last year by the parish teens for Sofia's wheelchair, and she knew what it meant. There would be no leaving. If the storm came, they would meet it here. She turned off the television and let the silence settle. Then she went to the mantel and lit the small sanctuary candle she kept beside a framed icon of the Virgin Mary. Its light made the gold paint flicker like living fire. On the table she arranged what she called her armor: her late husband's worn rosary, a brown scapula folded in half, and a small bottle of holy water, blessed by Father Miguel at the start of the year. Before the towers went down, she called the priest. His voice, calm as always, came through the static. "If the lines fail, Emma, know that I'm praying with you," he said. "Read Psalm 91, and when the wind rises, say the St. Michael prayer." She promised she would. Outside, headlights swept past the house as neighbors fled inland. Only one stopped. Harold Jenkins, the retired engineer from across the street. He looked uneasy, standing in the raincoat he dug out of storage, his hair already dripping. He handed her a small portable generator. "You'll need it more than I will," he said, trying to sound casual. She thanked him, and he nodded once before disappearing into the wet blur of his driveway. By nightfall, the air had turned thick, and the first feeder bands hissed against the windows. Emma moved Sofia's bed farther from the glass and taped a small index card to the frame. On it, she had written a single line from the Magnificat: "My soul magnifies the Lord." Then she sat beside her daughter and began to pray the rosary aloud. Each Hail Mary was steady, unhurried, her voice rising just enough to be heard over the wind. The rhythm calmed her, the way breathing does, before sleep. An hour later, the power flickered once, then failed completely. The refrigerator clicked off. The television went dark, and only the candle flame remained, trembling but brave. The house seemed to breathe with them. Rain drummed harder, then softened, then struck again, in wild bursts. From somewhere down the street came the sound of a garbage can, rolling and colliding with a car door. Emma ignored it. She focused on the beads, sliding one after another through her fingers, whispering each prayer as if setting bricks against fear. When she reached the third decade, the rhythm faltered. Something changed in the air. It wasn't silence. It was a pause, a held breath. Even the machines beside Sofia quieted, their hum blending into that strange hush. The house itself felt as if it had stopped to listen. Emma raised her head. The candlelight threw a reflection onto the dark window. And there, within that reflection, stood a figure. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks. That exhaustion and shadow had shaped a blur into a body, but the outline sharpened. A woman stood in the glass, her robe a soft blue that seemed to hold its own light. Her face was calm, sorrowful, and unafraid. Her hands were lifted, palms outward as though blessing the room or shielding it from the storm pressing on every wall. Emma didn't move. Her throat went dry, her heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. There was no sound, no thunder, no creak of wood, just that stillness, deep and weighty, like the air in a church, right before Mass begins. And then, without hearing a voice, she understood the words forming in her mind. "Be not afraid, I am with you." Tears rose before she could stop them. She wanted to speak, to say thank you, to fall to her knees, but she couldn't find breath enough to make a sound. The candle flame steadied. The machines near Sofia clicked once, then continued their gentle rhythm. Outside, the rain eased for a hot beat before another gust rattled the siding. Emma blinked, and the reflection was gone. The window showed only the storm again, water racing down the glass, lightning flickering far away. But the peace stayed, heavy and real. She reached for the rosary and found one bead warm beneath her fingertips, as though it had been held by someone else. She whispered, "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners," her voice shaking. The air carried a faint scent, sweet, floral, impossible in a house sealed tight against the wind. It lingered for just a moment, and then was gone. Emma looked toward Sofia. The girl's eyelids fluttered slightly, her breathing deep and even. Emma brushed her hair back, whispering, "It's all right, my darling. She's here with us." She didn't know how she knew it, only that the certainty filled the room, stronger than the storm outside. Rain resumed, harder this time. Lightning flared across the dunes, turning the curtains white for a second before darkness returned. Emma settled back into the chair beside the bed and took up the rosary again. The house shuddered under another gust, yet she no longer felt fear. She had seen something that wind could not touch. When she closed her eyes, she could still picture the woman's lifted hands, the calm on her face, and the promise that had entered the silence. "Be not afraid, I am with you." And as the storm gathered itself again beyond the walls, Emma kept praying, softly, faithfully, bead by bead, waiting for whatever came next. When the eye of Helene reached the Georgia coast, the world narrowed to pressure and raw. The air itself became a living thing, dense, deafening, relentless. Street lights blew out one by one until the neighborhood disappeared into moving blackness. Branches struck the siding like frantic birds. Loose shingles rattled against the wind and vanished into the dark. Inside the little cedar house, Emma Rosales felt the floor tremble under her feet. The generator coughed once, then steadied into a stubborn hum. It was the only man-made sound left, one thin heartbeat against the storm. She placed her palm on Sofia's head and began reading Psalm 91 aloud, her voice shaking but sure. "You shall not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day." Each word landed heavy, nailed into the timbers as if it could hold the roof itself. A shriek rose outside as a sheet of roofing skated down the asphalt. The whole house shuddered. Emma leaned her shoulder against the hospital bed, bracing it with her body as the gusts clawed at the walls. She prayed faster now, her lips barely keeping pace with her thoughts. The world had become noise, wind, water, fear. But then something changed. At the 10th Hail Mary, a long exhale swept past the house. Not head-on, but sideways, glancing, sliding. It wasn't the sound of retreat. It was the sound of turning. The wind no longer pressed on the glass. It slipped away, angling toward the dunes. The pressure in Emma's ears popped. The window frame quivered once, then stilled. Later, radar replays would show that Helene's inner band had drifted just a few miles east, barely a sliver, but enough to change which homes were flattened and which was spared. Emma didn't know that. She only knew the feel of mercy, the way her house exhaled, the way her ramp outside still stood, untouched. Across the street, a pine tree split in two, its top half crashing harmlessly into the yard instead of toward her window. The mailbox clanged. The rain shifted sideways, and the storm's anger seemed to veer, not die, but redirect. Emma whispered the St. Michael prayer through clenched teeth. "Defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil." When the next howl barreled down the street, the windows rattled but held, like teeth chattering in a face that refused to scream. At 11:03 p.m., the generator went silent. Darkness fell so suddenly, it felt alive. Emma clicked on the small battery lantern and saw her hands trembling. The rosary in her palm glimmered faintly. The center bead, where the decades meet, was warm. Not hot, not burning, but alive, pulsing like something that carried its own heartbeat. She froze. The candlelight caught her face and the tears on her cheeks, and just for a moment, the air filled with something sweet, a fragrance so out of place, it made her dizzy. Roses, faint, pure, impossible, amid salt and rain. Harold banged once on her door. His voice was gone to the wind, but she saw a faint flash of his flashlight, and his thumb raised in the dark. He was alive. That was enough. The hours that followed came in waves. Brief peace, sudden rage, short bursts of rain that hit the glass like thrown stones. But the storm no longer seemed to know where to strike. The worst of its voice had passed. By 2:40 a.m., the rain eased to a whisper. The house stood, breathing again, wet, scarred, but whole. Emma sank to her knees beside her daughter's bed. Her fingers were stiff, her throat raw, but she kept praying softly, one last Hail Mary at a time. When the calm finally settled, her first thought wasn't about the roof, or the siding, or the cost of repairs. It was awe, gratitude sharpened by wonder, because she knew what she had seen. The storm had sighed, when the woman in blue lifted her hands, and though the night still dripped with rain, Emma understood that something greater than weather had moved through her house, something that had bent the wind itself into obedience. Dawn came pale and tired, lifting what looked like a gray lid over the world. The storm had passed, but its fingerprints were everywhere. The street outside was littered with palm fronds, shingles, and fragments of vinyl siding, like confetti after a terrible parade. A stop sign leaned at an angle, pointing nowhere anyone could go. And yet standing at her door, Emma Rosales saw that her house was still there. The ramp she'd worried would tear away was unscarred. The glass had held. The cedar shingles had lost only a handful to the wind. She whispered a thank you, not out of habit, but out of wonder. The air still smelled of salt and damp wood. Her muscles ached from bracing through the night. She lit the camp stove, boiled water, and mixed Sofia's feed. The hum of the suction pump seemed gentler now, like a voice sighing in relief. When she opened the front door to call for Harold, she didn't need to. He was already there, pulling a trash can upright and setting it by her ramp. His eyes were wet, not from the wind this time. "Your house," he said, scanning the broken roofs and twisted fences up and down the street, took the wind like a ship takes a wave. Emma didn't answer. She just nodded, holding her rosary tight. Together, they checked on Miss Delaney, the widow 2 doors down. Her fence was gone, but her porch still stood. They cleared branches from her steps, and when words ran out, Emma started the Our Father right there in the driveway. Harold joined in halfway through, his voice rough but steady. By noon, Father Miguel arrived, mud up to his ankles, a satchel over one shoulder, and a thermos of coffee in hand. He looked exhausted, but alive. "Half the parish roof is gone," he said, "but the sanctuary lamp is still burning." He blessed each of them before stepping inside. Emma told him everything. She didn't leave out a word: the storm, the reflection, the silence, the woman in blue. She expected the wince, the quiet correction priests sometimes give when something sounds too close to miracle. But he didn't wince. He listened. When she finished, he only asked, "What did it move you to do?" Emma thought for a long time, her hand resting on Sofia's shoulder. "To love," she said softly, "and to trust." Father Miguel nodded. He blessed the home, tracing small crosses on the windowsill, on the bed frame, and over Sofia's forehead. Then he kissed her brow and whispered, "Peace be upon this house." When he left for the next family, Emma sank into the chair at the foot of her daughter's bed. She hadn't slept since the storm began. The rhythm of the machines lulled her, soft and patient. She drifted into what felt less like sleep and more like surrender. She woke to silence, not the dull hush of power outage silence, but something living, chosen, deliberate. The air shimmered faintly, as if the light itself had texture. The edges of the room glowed, and for a moment, Emma thought the storm had come back, until she saw the doorway. Between the kitchen and living room stood a presence, not shape, not shadow, but brightness with tenderness folded inside it. The woman in blue. She didn't blaze or hover. She simply was. Emma couldn't move. She didn't need to. Her hand found the rosary on its own. No words came from the figure, but one thought filled the space, like a warm blanket gently laid over the soul. Stay. Then came understanding, wordless but certain, like a mother's guidance, whispered to the heart. Keep this house open. Comfort the ones who kept vigil alone. Emma didn't breathe for a moment. The air smelled of roses again, faint but unmistakable, blending with the salt of the sea. The light began to thin, not fading, but rising, like dawn behind clouds. And when she blinked, the room was itself again. The wood floor, the candle stub, the quiet hum of machines. But the peace remained. She lifted the rosary. The centipede was warm, alive again, like a pulse shared between heaven and earth. From the porch, Father Miguel's voice drifted in through the cracked door. He had returned to gather his things and stopped mid-step, sniffing the air. He turned to her and smiled faintly. "Do you smell that?" he asked. Emma nodded, tears filling her eyes. "It's roses," he said softly. "Give thanks and write it down." Emma pressed the rosary to her heart. Outside, the sun broke through the last of the clouds, painting gold across the wet glass. The house, her house, felt lighter, as though some part of heaven had decided to stay. Word of what happened on that street never reached the evening news. It didn't need to. It spread in quieter ways, through casseroles passed hand to hand, through charger cords run from one generator to another, through whispered prayers under Emma's carport, where people came not to talk about miracles, but to borrow a little light. By the next Sunday, the parish gathered in a grocery store parking lot. The church roof was gone and the pews were soaked, but Father Miguel said Mass anyway, standing behind a folding table that served as the altar. People came in taped-up boots, raincoats, and borrowed hats. Someone brought an old guitar. Someone else a thermos of coffee that never seemed to empty. And when the priest lifted the host, a flock of pelicans circled overhead in perfect formation, wings white against the washed-out sky. Nobody said anything then, but afterward, as people packed their chairs, the talk wasn't about roofs or claims. It was about what they felt at that moment, how it seemed that heaven itself was acknowledging their survival. Harold stood off to the side, hands buried in his pockets, pretending to be uninterested. But he didn't leave. Not that Sunday, or the one after. In the weeks that followed, Emma Rosales did exactly what the unspoken word had told her to do. She kept her door open. At first it was just neighbors stopping by to charge phones or share coffee. Then came caregivers, people like her who stayed behind during storms because they couldn't leave the ones who depended on them. Emma set out a folding table, 2 thermoses, and a notebook. She called it the caregiver table, and before long it became a gathering place twice a week. Someone donated a hospital hoist. Another brought a recliner that tilted gently without jolting. A deacon began delivering small containers of consecrated hosts so that those who couldn't travel could still receive communion. Emma didn't advertise it. She just left the porch light on and the gate open. Then one afternoon, a call came from a caseworker. She said a private foundation, unnamed, was releasing emergency funds for in-home ventilator upgrades. Emma hadn't applied for anything, yet the paperwork arrived already approved, stamped, and signed. At the bottom of the accompanying letter, one line stood out: donor request for the house that prayed. With the grant came a permit, fast-tracked through the same bureaucratic maze she'd been stuck in for months. The county even waived the fees to widen her doorway and reinforce the ramp. No explanation, just a blessing. A month later, a neurologist from the teaching hospital came through the neighborhood to check on patients affected by the storm. He saw Sofia and recommended a new therapy device that might help stimulate her hand muscles. The insurance company approved it on the first try. That had never happened before. And then 3 months after Helene, during the noon Angelus, Emma felt something. She was praying as usual, the sunlight spilling through the repaired window, the rosary resting between her fingers. And in that still moment, she felt a tiny flutter, just the faintest pressure against her palm. She looked down. Sofia's right hand was moving. Not much, just a tremor, a slight curl of her fingers around a single bead. But it was real, deliberate, alive. Emma froze, tears flooding her eyes before she could even call for anyone. It wasn't a cinematic miracle. It was something quieter, something truer. And in that small movement, Emma recognized the same mercy she'd felt the night the hurricane turned. The mercy that doesn't dazzle, but endures. Not spectacle, but fidelity. From that day on, her house became what some called Mary's house. People came by with casseroles and stories. Harold started stopping in on Tuesdays, just to fix things, though nothing really needed fixing. By Advent, he was sitting in the pews again, silent but present. And when the priest opened the confessional, Harold was the first in line after 22 years. By Christmas, a new circle had formed, Mary's Mantle, a small group of caregivers who met in Emma's living room once a week. They prayed, talked, and helped one another carry the long hours that come with loving someone who cannot answer back. The little icon of the Virgin hung above the mantle, and beside it, the sanctuary candle never went out again. On the first anniversary of Hurricane Helene, the diocese quietly recorded the testimonies. There were photographs of the house, letters from neighbors, even Harold's brief statement about what he saw in her window that night. No formal declaration came, as is proper. The church moves slowly, and Emma didn't need the proof. She already had all the confirmation she could ever want. She had a daughter whose fingers could now curl around a single bead. She had a street that prayed instead of panicked, and she had a home that had become something holier than brick and wood, a chapel built out of survival and trust. Every afternoon, when the winter sun came through the same window that once reflected a storm, the center bead of her rosary would sometimes brighten, not in a flash, not in spectacle, just a quiet shimmer, as if catching a light the eye could not see. And when it did, Emma would whisper the Divine Mercy Prayer. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. Then she'd look at Sofia and remember that single word the woman in blue had left behind. Stay. Because she had stayed, and because she had trusted, the gift had come, not in thunder, but in faithfulness. Sometimes miracles don't shout. Sometimes they unfold in silence, in hospital rooms, in storm-torn houses, in ordinary hands that refuse to let go of hope. Emma's story reminds us that faith doesn't always part the sea. Sometimes it simply keeps the roof standing until morning. If you believe stories like this matter, don't leave yet. Before you go, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next true story of faith. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed something you couldn't explain. Like this video if it touched your heart, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that God still moves in the quietest places. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you in the storm and in the calm that follows.